Allama Iqbal, with a faith in Islam and a reasonable Gnostic faith indicating his deep certitude in God's sovereignty, moves his mind to search for secrets and mysteries of the creation. In his Islamic Gnostic poems and such verified stories as the Souvenir of Hijaz, the Eastern Message, the Familiar Secrets, and the Mysteries of Rapture, he talks about the principles of internal ontology of things, an idealization of the existential world. While his thoughts are at the height of their powers, he invites Muslims to solidify familiar philosophy exactly in accordance to monotheism, to bring about a new perspective, a new worldview into the Islamic world.
So many memories are related to this house. My father came to live in this house when he was 11. Now, what sort of memory do you want me to tell you?
Talking about Iqbal's thoughts reminds us of the familiar thoughts as his central train of thought. We hear Iqbal saying, to a mullah, a denier of God is an unbeliever. To me, more unbeliever is he who denies his own self.
Just ask, what is Iqbal's philosophy? The answer is, the philosophy of your own. Iqbal's philosophy is in fact the philosophy of one's own, or familiar philosophy. What is familiar philosophy? That you know your origin very well.
In his The Persian Psalms, Allama says, you are a branch of Lutri. Let you not be a thorn of the lawn. No matter if you are a denier of him, deny not the self of him.
God created man as his successor. What are the duties and the responsibilities of a successor?
Then, the most important thing in Iqbal's thoughts is his thought and philosophy. The source of Iqbal's philosophy is in fact his thought. But what is Iqbal's familiar thought?
Never in my life have I been interested in the world's wealth or posts. I built this very house just to accept my wife's repeated requests. My wife's fate in this house had a different form. Here became a safe place for those in search of their identity.
I clearly saw that most Muslims in the motherland had lost their Islamic identity, and to regain it, they need to struggle hard.
This house, this quiet corner, became a place for those who wish to fly thoughts of self-belief, something much needed by all.
This house originally belonged to my father, Shabbir Ahmad. The house title deed had already been issued to my grandmother. Upon the death of my grandmother, the deed was transferred to my father. Allama Iqbal would live here as my father's tenant. He paid the rent to my father every month or every 3 months.
Never did I lose my interest in my native land's people. My best time was when I was among people to see them struggle hard to earn their living. I was inspired by their uproar in the Anarkli district. Loftier than the heavens is the station of man, and the beginning of education is respect for man.
Iqbal lays heavy emphasis on the familiar secrets and mysteries of rapture. Familiarity, as seen by Gnostics, means to entertain the self, to fully know the self. It's a famous statement that knowing the self is meant knowing God. Iqbal emphasized, first and foremost, returning to the self. Search within yourself in order to know the self.
Iqbal invites us to know ourselves before doing anything else. Anything else. We shall heighten ourselves to become a human being par excellence.
From God's own being, the self got a being so. From God's own show to self he gave a show. About this shining pearl I know not where it could be then without a river there.
Iqbal meant to look carefully at human beings on the one hand and to look carefully at Islamic ideology on the other hand. For that very reason, we see Iqbal describing in detail the Eastern society and the essence of Islamic thought.
Who is a selected man? A selected man is the one who is searched for by God. He is in a form desired by God. God wants that kind of human being. This is possible only if man searches for himself, to train himself in a desirable way, to maintain the self, to try hard to fully understand the self. This way finally leads to knowing well the Supreme Being.
The greatest message of Iqbal, as expressed in his poems, is to know yourself, to turn to your own self, to know the East, not the West.
I was well aware that the main reason why India went under the yoke of British colonization was lack of knowledge of self and reliance on others. Self-awareness springs out self-dependence and internal richness. Know yourself, know your hidden parts, nurture your parts, and create a new world which will compensate for old shortcomings and soul defects, to pave the way for comprehensive development. It is the self which originates existence. It is self-awareness which gives birth to human values. It is the self which affects existence. What human beings see or intuit is a manifestation of the self through mysteries. The form of existence is an effect of the self. Whatsoever thou seest is a secret of the self.
Allama says that many books about philosophy have been written, but no one bears in mind the context in which they are written. Around the world, there were Muslims who were losing their glory. They were being condemned by other people around them. Why? Allama thinks of the answer to this question.
Iqbal selected verse as his field of activity just because he was a real poet. There are many poets. Some are searched by poems. Others search for poems. Even great poets who are sought for by their own poems sometimes go to search for their own poems. None of them, however, is as successful as Iqbal was.
You should know that Allama was a revolutionary poet. He was not simply a regular poet. He composed verses, as he himself would claim, to transfer his thoughts to others, especially to the new generation.
He did not select poetry. It was poetry which selected him. One cannot ask the question why Allama selected poetry to transfer his thoughts. One should ask why poetry selected Allama to make use of the poetry as a means to transfer his thoughts. Poetry is a light projected on the heart by God. This holds true of all divine sciences. True poetry is of that form.
'Tis the poet's breast and beauty unveils. 'Tis from his Sinai and beauty's beams arise. By his look the fair is made fairer. Through his enchantments nature is more beloved. Heavenly we go, like raw novices, stumbling on the way to gold. His nightingale hath played a tune, and I laid a plot to beguile us. that He may lead us into life's paradise, and that life's bow may become a full circle.
He has his own school of philosophy. What is a school of philosophy? It means that a thinker expresses his own view on everything which makes a man, on everything which man thinks about. He expresses his views, for example, on politics, ethics, education, life, and lifestyle.
Allama says that if one studies the history of Islam, he will find out that Islam never experienced a harsh critical period to need Muslims to rise up and save it. Quite the contrary, conditions have always been such that Islam has always tried to save its followers when they were experiencing difficult, hard times. Nowadays, Muslims must do the same thing. They must try to know themselves and rely only on themselves.
Iqbal's philosophy is objective and tangible. He pulls down philosophy from the metaphysical world to make it tangible and applicable to common people. Iqbal's philosophy is therefore a practical philosophy. It can be put into practice.
O Muslims, you have to preserve your own self. You must follow God and His book, the Holy Quran. When you achieve success in making your own self, you can resist even the whole world. No one can harm you. What is the basis of survival? Survival is based on making your own self. It is the self, the nature mentioned by Quran. And this is the essence of Iqbal's thoughts. This is what Iqbal means of the concept of self. For that very reason, every member of the Islamic world should know this way of thinking, personally and socially.
Iqbal is a philosopher with a philosophical school of his own. What does his school say? Iqbal expresses his perspective on all the fields I named. He tells us what to do and what not to do. He gives us, as human beings and as Muslims, a particular pattern to follow. He thinks of the whole world. He is, in other words, a sort of cosmopolitan man. He addresses the whole world.
The enemy is very active to destroy the Islamic world from within. I personally think that we need Iqbal's ideas about Islam now more than ever before. You are simultaneously a learnt man, a Sayyid, a descendant of the Prophet. But tell me, are you a Muslim too?
A Muslim is called infidel by another Muslim. It is not a non-Muslim who calls him infidel. It is a Muslim. All problems are created and spread here and there by those who are pursuing only their own interests.
There is no God but Allah. As Iqbal says, the key to our unity, salvation, and survival, and a sign of familiarity is in this phrase, there is no God but Allah. Those who follow this phrase never behead Muslims. Iqbal's basic philosophy is that all of us should be unified. All of us should form one single family. Muslims should get unified to guard the sanctuary. I mean, Muslims from the Nile shores to the city of Qazveh.
Iqbal tells us to put aside personal interests and to move into a direction leading to social interests. Put aside your personal interests. Let's talk about our religion, our unity. We will end in success. Just because of his thoughts, Iqbal is living on today.